Kayla, and welcome back to Regency Rumors, a YouTube channel where I explore Regency history, the history of travel, heritage, classic literature, and period dramas. Today, I am going to be reviewing the Queen Charlotte book, which is the accompanying book to Queen Charlotte, a Bridgerton story, which is out now on Netflix. The Queen Charlotte book is written by Julia Quinn, who is the author of the Bridgerton series, and Shonda Rhimes, who is the creator of the show Bridgerton and the showrunner for several other shows like Grey's Anatomy and Private Practice, and probably some more current shows that I'm not aware of because it's been a while since I've watched Grey's Anatomy and Private Practice. I pre-ordered this. I got this about 2 weeks ago. It came out a couple days after the Netflix series aired. It is in hardback. I think I paid $12.99 for it, UK price, and then in the US, I think it's priced at $19 or $20. It's a really pretty cover. It matches a lot of the marketing that's out for Queen Charlotte. It's around 300 pages, which is very similar to other Julia Quinn books, but Queen Charlotte is a prequel series. I think it's just a mini-series to Bridgerton. Shonda Rhimes has said she was quite taken with the story of Queen Charlotte, so this was a passion project for her. She really wanted to dive into the backstory of the Queen, who plays kind of a side character in the main Bridgerton series. But this series is all about Queen Charlotte and her husband George, and some other characters that are quite big in the Bridgerton series, such as Lady Danbury and Lady Violet Bridgerton. So the book is around 300 pages. The text is quite big, so it's a really easy read. To be fair, I read it in about 2 days. As far as the storyline goes, it of course was a really enjoyable book because it matched the series almost to a T, and that's what I'm going to get into today in the book review. I didn't dislike the book, but I also was not crazy about it. I've always enjoyed Julia Quinn's books. They're from the two main characters' perspectives, so the love interests. So they'll show the female character and the male character's perspective, and everyone else is kind of side characters in each of her stories between the Bridgerton siblings and the prequel series, the Smith-Smythes. You might recognize that name because the Smith-Smythe family is mentioned in the Queen Charlotte series. Their storyline in Queen Charlotte doesn't really have anything to do with the Smith-Smythe books, but I recommend them. I think they're really good. I don't think they're as good as Bridgerton, I'll be honest, but they have the same tone to them, and they have the same kind of formulaic relationship patterns that we see in other Julia Quinn books. So some people might not like the commercial style of Julia Quinn's Regency books. They are very formulaic. They kind of start where the couple either doesn't like each other or they've had some sort of a history where they break apart and they quarrel. There's something in the Regency world where they're not allowed to be together, or they can't be physical with one another because of the rules at the time. And then, of course, they come back together at the end. The pacing in Julia Quinn's books are almost always the same. They're very similar in each of the books that she writes. I personally happen to like that. I read an array of historical fiction, so I don't mind that her particular style of writing has that kind of formulaic feel to it. I also am aware that her books are not very historically accurate, and I know that they're kind of a commercialized version of, Regency romances. And because I go into her books knowing that, I don't mind that. I really enjoy kind of the lightness of her books and how the different characters intertwine between kind of the Duke and I all the way to her final book, where the siblings interact with each other between the books and it kind of builds between the different couples. I like that aspect of her series. I've not really seen it in the same way in other Regency romances. I don't mind that kind of more cheerful side of Julia Quinn's writing. Some people want, Regency romances to be very historically accurate. I kind of know what I'm going into when I start one of her books, and there's a comfort behind that for me. I enjoy knowing that I'm going to get a happily ever after between a couple at the end of her stories. That's not to say that I don't like reading more traditional historical fiction where someone has taken years to research their book, and you can tell that the language that's used, the setting, the relationship between the characters, that they're all kind of more historically correct. I really love that aspect of other historical fiction books. I think that Julia Quinn has always been aware of what her lane is. She enjoys staying in that, and I enjoy consuming her books books as kind of more cheerful Regency romances. So in that aspect, Queen Charlotte is no different. This is not a historically accurate book. The language in this book I would not say is historically accurate. This is supposed to be for a more modern audience. I think anyone who's watched Bridgerton or Queen Charlotte are going to know that these series are on the lighter side of historical fiction. The beginning of the Queen Charlotte prequel series has a note at the beginning from Lady Whistledown that says, don't take this seriously. This is not historically accurate. This is about the Queen from Bridgerton. And the book is exactly like that. If you're looking for this to be a historically accurate version of Queen Charlotte and King George III, then you're going to be disappointed. That's not what this is about. They obviously do take from historical points in her life. They take aspects such as her speaking German and her possibly having Black ancestry, and they put that in the book and the series. But in terms of anything kind of extremely historically accurate, that's not what this series is about, and that's not what this book is for. So, did I enjoy this book? As a fan of Julia Quinn's work in the past, yes. I think if you've watched the show, then you will enjoy the book because it's the same exact story. But that's also where I have a major qualm with this book. Normally when we watch adaptations of classic literature and we see them in a miniseries, we see them in period dramas, the book has so much more to say than the show does, right? Because the show can't cover everything. There's characters in miniseries like Pride and Prejudice and Sense and Sensibility that they're simply not able to show on screen that are in the books. However, with this book, it was the other way around. So this book has 4 main characters in it compared to the 2 that normally Julia Quinn has. This book is from the perspective of Queen Charlotte, her husband George, Agatha Danbury, so Lady Danbury in the Bridgerton series, and Brimsley, Queen Charlotte's right-hand man. So each chapter flips through their different perspectives and kind of carries on the story through their eyes. I don't mind books that switch between perspectives. I quite enjoy that. I enjoyed that in the Bridgerton series. However, having 4 different people in this book, it's not a very big book when you kind of look at how large that the print is. There was just so much that was left out of this book that was actually in the series. Normally when I pick up a book that a TV series or a movie has been adapted from, I'm expecting there to be way more information, maybe backstories on the character, descriptions of the setting, more detail into people's relationships, more dialogue. I'm expecting a lot more out of the book than I am the film or the series because there's simply not time to put all that on screen. However, it was switched for this book. I found that there were storylines about Lady Danbury that really told us about her backstory and about some of her motivations that were in the show that were completely missing in the book. They just weren't even there. Likewise with Brimsley, because there was so much missing in the show about what happens with him, what happens with his love interest Reynolds, I was expecting that the book would kind of give me more information on that, or at least give him a bit of a backstory. Why is it that he's put in this position to be working for the Queen? What kind of life has he come from before? And what are his motivations? And we just don't see that in the book. In fact, there's less information about his life in the book than there is in the series. In terms of Queen Charlotte and George, obviously they were the main focus of this book, like in the series. I would say some of the more intimate scenes were well written. I think the chemistry between George and Charlotte does translate on page, but you can definitely tell that this book is trying to match the pace of the show rather than being its own book. I felt like the pacing of this book was going by so quickly that there wasn't time to develop the setting, to develop any sort of backstories for anyone. I wasn't really aware of the motivations of the main characters, and we really didn't have a good wrap-up at the end of what happened to them. Unlike the series, there's no flashbacks in this book. There's also no Lady Violet. So some of the main themes that were explored in the series, such as widowhood, men's mental health, women's sexuality, those themes don't really bleed through into this book. What this book does is just make sure that you read point by point, page by page, exactly like the series does. So they're trying so hard to show all the major scenes from the show that the storytelling is really lacking. I felt like I was almost reading a script from the show. There was an overwhelming amount of dialogue from the show in the book. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think in a lot of ways it can be really enjoyable to open up a book and be like, oh my gosh, here's the line when this happened, and this is exactly the way that this line happened. So I think in that way it can be really enjoyable. I think there's something comforting about reading a story in a different form and it being very similar to the form that you've seen. However, this was to the point that it was a detriment to the book. They were trying so hard to make sure all these scenes were included that the pacing of this book was rapid. There was barely any buildup between Charlotte and George. Agatha's storyline was not properly introduced or developed. I was confused why Brimsley's storyline was even in this book because it didn't really serve anything to the story in the same way that it did in the series. I was really hoping for some more substance in this book that you couldn't find in the series. That's what I assumed this book was going to come out for. The great minds of Julia Quinn and Shonda Rhimes were going to come together and, kind of make this great book that had a mix of passion and heart, emotion, good romance, and relationship storytelling. And it just falls short because it's just trying to make sure that all the scenes that you recognize in the show are in this book. I don't think this book needed to be a page-by-page copy of the TV show. I think it should have been its own entity. I'm not saying that the book has to veer off from the TV series and it has to have a completely different plot line or different characters, anything like that. It could have still been very similar to the TV series and just expanded on what wasn't there. Instead, there was bad pacing and there was not a lot of the answers that we were wanting from the series explored on page. The things I did like about this book was that it highlighted Charlotte's past just a little bit more than the series. I felt like season 2 of Bridgerton did a pretty good job of showing some of the cultural aspects of Kate and Edwina's life, some of their pasts. I think the show did a good job showing some of the insecurities that Kate had about traveling to a new place and having to navigate a new society. And I felt like with the Queen Charlotte series that Charlotte tells us that she's uncomfortable and tells us that she speaks another language, but because the actress has a British accent and we don't see where she came from before, we're told that rather than shown it in the story. And in the book, at least, there's references to German, to her struggling with English here and there, to her missing her home life and a little bit of what it was like for her to grow up in a more German society. So I think the book did a better job at that than the series did, but it's only ever so slightly. I think there was one added scene with Brimsley and Reynolds that explains the relationship a little bit more. It explains Reynolds' backstory, which I thought was really interesting. But then the book also sacrificed a lot of Agatha's story, and we get none of the story of Queen Charlotte and her children, her relationship with Lady Danbury and Violet in her older age. So a lot of the strengths in the Queen Charlotte series was showing the evolution of these women from younger women who are trying to navigate kind of scary society, navigate relationships, like Charlotte dealing with George's mental illness, Agatha trying to secure her place in society as a Black woman and to keep her title, and then Brimsley living a life of service and kind of taking a back seat when he's younger, and we see that follows through into his older age. That kind of affects how we see these characters, right? Seeing them when they're younger and how their origin stories make them how they are in Bridgerton. But we don't see any of that in this book. So it seems like those storylines are not as powerful because the book is just trying to make sure that we get through all of the scenes that we've seen in the show and not actually developing these characters properly from a younger age to the older contemporary age that we see in Bridgerton. I wouldn't go as far to say that it's badly written. I've enjoyed other Julia Quinn books, and of course, Shonda Rhimes' writing in all of these TV series has always been brilliant. It's just that I was expecting so much more. I think if you'd like to pick up this book and say, hey, I want to be able to read word for word the exact copy of the series onto book form, then this is the book for you. Because it is just an absolute carbon copy of the show. Almost all the dialogue is exactly the same to the show. There's only one or two scenes in the book that are not in the show, and then there's a lot missing from the show that is not in this book. But if you're like me and you want your book adaptation to have more substance in it, to have extra scenes, to give backstories to characters, then this is not the book for you. I was really expecting so much more from this book. If you were hoping to learn more about these characters, this book is not going to give you that. This book is more of a word-by-word adaptation of the show that maybe if you wanted to, you could sit there and read alongside it. This is definitely not even a book that I would say, oh, you could read this book and not even watch the show. I would not recommend that because there's so much you're missing in this book that is in the show. So while I enjoyed reading this book, would I read it again? No. I think reading about Black characters and reading storylines like The Great Experiment are important, but the show does a way better job of representing that and telling us about that and the effects that it has on characters like Lady Danbury than the book does. The book is trying so hard to keep up with the show that there's so much of the heart that we see in this series missing on page. So if you're thinking of buying this book, I hope my review was useful. I'm not trying to be disparaging about this book. I was really excited about this. Like I said, I've read most of Julia Quinn's stuff. I also am just a general reader of Regency romances, but I just enjoy this genre in general. And I would say this book doesn't really line up with a lot of the books that I've read in the past. It doesn't grip me in the same way. And this series totally gripped me. It gripped all of us. So I'm sorry to say that I was disappointed in this book, but I hope that this helped you decide whether or not you should read the book and purchase it. And let me know how you found the book in the comments below. If you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. We're a new channel, so any new subscriptions or likes or comments helps us, and I'd love to be able to create more Regency content, more historical content, and to talk about what I love best. Period dramas. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, my husband and I do a recap podcast of Bridgerton and Queen Charlotte, and it's here on the YouTube channel. We have 2 new episodes of Queen Charlotte, and we talk about Regency history, relationships, British and American differences, the history of the real King George and Charlotte's relationship, and the realities of medicine in the Georgian era. So check those videos out here on the channel, and thank you for watching! Should I do this like a makeup review? I've never done anything like that. You know, like how the makeup people, like, here, can you... No. Okay, hold on. Is that focused? Is it... Is it...